For most of our lives, the American dream followed a simple promise: work hard, build a career, start a family, buy a home, and at some point, things are supposed to feel stable, not perfect, not easy, just stable. For a lot of people in their 30s and 40s, that moment never came, not because they failed, but because the version of the American dream they were working toward quietly stopped working while they were busy building their lives. This isn't about people who gave up. It's about people who did what they were told. They went to school. They built careers. They delayed gratification. They took on responsibility. They started families. They're raising kids. They're managing schedules. They're paying bills on time. They're not reckless. They're not lazy. They're not chasing luxury. And yet, despite doing everything right, it still feels like they're constantly behind. Like stability is always just out of reach. Like the margin for error keeps shrinking. Like one unexpected expense could knock everything sideways. If that feeling is familiar, this isn't a conversation about motivation or mindset. It's a conversation about what changed. The American dream was never about being rich. It was about normalcy. A modest home in a decent neighborhood, two or three kids, a dog, cars that start in the morning, a vacation once in a while. The ability to say yes to your kids without immediately doing mental math. The ability to handle a problem without it becoming a crisis. Not luxury, not excess, just a sense that if you kept showing up and doing your part, life would feel manageable. For decades, that version of life wasn't exceptional. It was expected. And for a long time, it worked quietly in the background. You didn't have to think about it constantly. You didn't have to optimize every decision. You just lived. What makes this moment so disorienting isn't that life is hard. Life has always been hard. What's different now is the gap between expectation and reality. Many people grew up watching their parents reach stability on a single income or close to it. They watched homes get paid off. They watched college costs feel manageable. They watched life gradually loosen as their parents got older. Now, those same milestones don't bring the same relief. People are hitting what used to be safe markers: solid careers, decent incomes, dual earners, and still feeling like they're treading water. On paper, they're doing better than previous generations at the same age. Emotionally, they feel less secure. That disconnect creates confusion because when the rules don't seem to work anymore, the first instinct is to assume the problem is personal, that if things feel tight, it must be because you mismanaged something, or didn't plan well enough, or made the wrong choice somewhere along the way. But that explanation only works if the system itself stayed the same. It didn't. Most people didn't wake up one day and realize something was wrong. They felt it in small moments. Standing in a grocery store, doing math they never used to do, looking at home prices and quietly closing the app, recalculating a vacation and deciding it wasn't worth the stress. They delayed things that used to feel normal, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. They bought less house than they planned. They waited longer to have kids. They pushed goals back a few years at a time. They told themselves it was temporary. Each decision made sense on its own. Together, they added up to a life that felt tighter every year. That's why this is so hard to explain. Nothing collapsed. Nothing failed dramatically. There was no single breaking point. It just stopped getting easier, even as people did everything they were told would make it easier. There was no announcement when things changed, no headline that said, "The math no longer works." Housing costs began rising faster than incomes. Childcare quietly became a second mortgage. Healthcare turned into a permanent variable instead of a predictable expense. The cost of stability detached from the income required to support it. And because the shift was gradual, most people didn't notice it happening. They were too busy getting married, buying starter homes, having kids, building careers. By the time the realization hit, the commitments were already locked in. That's when the pressure started to feel constant, not overwhelming all at once, just always there. On paper, things often still look fine, but emotionally, something feels off. And when that feeling has no clear explanation, it turns inward. That's where frustration starts. That's where guilt creeps in. That's where people begin to wonder what they did wrong. And that's exactly where the story usually goes off track. Once something stops working, people look for explanations. And the explanation most people were given was simple: if things feel tight, you just need to do more, make a little more money, budget a little better, delay things a little longer. The lie wasn't that this advice was malicious. The lie was that it assumed the system hadn't changed. It assumed the same effort would still produce the same outcome. For a long time, that assumption was true. It isn't anymore. This advice sticks because it used to work. Making more money really did solve most problems. Budgeting really did create breathing room. Delaying gratification really did pay off. So when people struggle now, they naturally reach for the same tools. And when those tools don't work the way they used to, the conclusion feels obvious. It must be a personal failure. But advice that worked in one economic environment doesn't automatically work in another. And that disconnect is where a lot of frustration lives. For years, the default solution to financial stress was simple: earn more. And many people did exactly that. They took on more responsibility, they chased promotions, they changed jobs, they worked longer hours. On paper, it worked. Incomes went up. But the relief people expected never arrived because every gain was met with a matching increase somewhere else. Higher income often meant higher housing costs. Better jobs came with higher insurance premiums. More stability came with more fixed obligations. Making more money stopped creating margin, it just raised the floor. Budgeting used to be about control. You tracked expenses, found inefficiencies, and reclaimed space. Now, for many families, budgeting feels different. There's nothing left to optimize. Housing is fixed, childcare is fixed, healthcare is unpredictable, food and transportation are non negotiable. So budgeting becomes less about choice and more about survival. Not how do we improve our situation, but what do we cut next? That shift changes how people feel about money. It stops being a tool and starts feeling like a constraint. Another quiet piece of advice became common: just wait. Wait to buy a house. Wait to have kids. Wait to feel ready. For a while, waiting made sense, but over time, waiting stopped being a strategy and became a lifestyle. People postponed milestones not because they didn't want them, but because they couldn't make the math work. And every delay came with a cost: less time, more pressure, fewer options. Waiting wasn't buying security, it was just compressing the future. This is where things turn. Because once people realize that working harder, earning more, budgeting tighter, and waiting longer don't produce relief, something breaks emotionally, not dramatically, quietly. They stop feeling in control. They start feeling like no matter what they do, the outcome barely changes. That's not laziness, that's learned helplessness. It's what happens when effort and reward lose their connection. For people with families, this feeling is amplified because the stakes aren't abstract, they're immediate. Housing choices affect school districts, work schedules affect time with kids, financial stress bleeds into every decision. There's no room for big mistakes, so every choice carries weight. That constant pressure doesn't feel like ambition, it feels like walking a tightrope without a net. This is where many people turn inward. They stop talking about money, they stop sharing concerns, they assume everyone else is managing better. Because from the outside, things look fine, careers exist, families function, life moves forward. But internally, there's a quiet tension, a sense that the life they were promised requires a level of effort that never eases, and that realization is exhausting. At this stage, it's not about money anymore. It's about expectation. People aren't grieving a lost lifestyle. They're grieving the belief that things would eventually settle, that the hardest part would be temporary, that if they kept doing the right things, life would stop feeling so fragile. Losing that belief changes how people see the future, and this is the moment where the story usually splits in two directions. Some people blame themselves and burn out, others begin to question the system itself. The difference between those paths isn't effort, it's understanding. Once you see it clearly, the problem isn't mysterious. The American dream didn't disappear, it didn't collapse, it wasn't taken away overnight, it was slowly repriced. The expectations stayed the same, the inputs changed: work hard, build a career, start a family, buy a home. Those steps didn't move. What moved was the cost of each one. And because the steps stayed familiar, most people kept walking them, assuming the destination would still be there. Feeling stuck doesn't mean you failed. It means you're operating inside a system that changed its rules without telling you. Most people weren't reckless. They didn't overspend wildly. They didn't abandon responsibility. They followed a map that used to lead somewhere. When that map stopped working, they blamed themselves. That reaction is understandable. It's also misplaced because individual discipline can't solve structural math problems. For a long time, effort was the answer to everything. If something felt unstable, you worked harder. If money felt tight, you pushed more. That mindset built a lot of lives. But today, effort alone doesn't create margin. Awareness does. Understanding where pressure is coming from changes how you make decisions. It doesn't magically fix the math, but it stops you from wasting energy fighting the wrong battles. Once people stop blaming themselves, something important happens. They stop chasing every upgrade. They stop measuring success by outdated milestones. They stop assuming everyone else has it figured out. Instead, they start asking better questions. What actually matters here? What trade offs am I willing to make? What version of stability is realistic now? Those questions don't shrink ambition, they sharpen it. There's another layer quietly shaping all of this. Technology is moving faster than stability. Jobs change quicker, skills expire sooner, certainty feels shorter lived. That doesn't mean opportunity disappears, it means predictability does. And when predictability disappears, traditional life plans become harder to rely on. That uncertainty adds weight to every decision. It's not fear, it's realism. Redefining the American dream doesn't mean lowering standards, it means adjusting expectations to match reality. For many families, success now looks less like expansion and more like resilience. Not bigger, more stable, not impressive, sustainable, not chasing everything, but protecting what matters. That shift isn't defeat, it's adaptation. A calmer version of success doesn't show up well on social media. It looks like fewer risks you can't afford, fewer obligations you didn't choose, more flexibility where it matters. It looks like decisions made with eyes open, not pressure. And most importantly, it looks like letting go of the belief that life is supposed to eventually feel effortless. For people with kids, this reframing is essential because children don't need perfect lives, they need stable ones. They need presence more than progress, consistency more than upgrades. Understanding the system doesn't remove responsibility, it clarifies it. When people understand what actually changed, something subtle but powerful happens. The weight shifts. Not onto governments, not onto corporations, not onto vague enemies, but off the individual, off the idea that every struggle is a personal flaw. That shift doesn't make life easy, it makes it honest.